In this video, I'm going to be breaking down how I made this official album artwork for the band Bloom, from the initial concepts to showing how stuff was made inside Photoshop. Let's get into it. So this whole process started by me meeting with Jared, one of the members of the band Bloom, and he came to me with this idea where he wanted the album to be focused on these photos of their hometown and evoke this feeling of nostalgia. The photos that Jared actually supplied me were a really good starting point, and shout out to Jack Fontes, who was the photographer on this project. I had a feeling instantly when I saw these that they would be great hero images, and just doing some simple and tasteful typography on top of it and integrating it with some maybe printed and scanning techniques would really help wrap it all together and invoke that feeling of nostalgia and kind of this fondness of the seasons changing and childhood kind of wonder. This one specific photo stood out the most to me, and I think something about the season of fall or autumn, whatever you want to call it, has this very nostalgic feeling and really signifies the seasons changing and kind of time passing. So I started with this image as the base, and we wanted to keep the front very simple, so I just added some minimal typography. I tried so many different simple layouts, mainly these kind of condensed thin sans serifs and some more classic serifs like Neuhaus Grotesque, but just stuff that was very minimal and laid out on this simple grid that I set up, and something that wouldn't distract too much from the actual photo, but still look intentional and clean. I decided on this final one for the layout. Pretty simple, and I'll show you inside Photoshop how the actual effects were done. So now that we're here in the file, you can see here's the base actual layout with the Bloom type and the light we chase. And I believe the font I used for this, was IBM Plex Mono. And then you can see the difference in the textured and scanned version. It darkens up the shadows a lot more, creates that texture within the blacks, and I think just made the really highlights kind of glow and feel very, a lot more dreamlike and kind of nostalgic, for lack of a better word. I know it's used a lot throughout the course of this project, but that was kind of the goal. So I can show you, and here's the original scan, right? My printer was fucked up during this project, so a lot of stuff I had to do a lot of corrections in, but you can even see too, I have this folder right here, right? I'll show you real quick. I did a lot of different prints to really try to dial in the right amount of ink we use, the right exact color, how dark I wanted the blacks, how orange, how yellow, and my printer was struggling. My poor printer was put through the ringer. And I don't always have this much fucking paper at the end of a project, but it is kind of cool when you're doing a little bit of analog stuff throughout the course to have something physical to remember it by. So I just threw it in this little folder. Anyway, here's the original, right? So we start here, and then here's some of the photo effects. You can see I fixed up the black, and how I do this is just with the selective color and the different hue and saturations. With the selective color, you can go into the reds, whatever, add some blue to the reds, it's just simple color grading stuff. It's all pretty self-explanatory once you get in there. Hue and saturation, I adjusted it to be a slightly more reddish orange to fit the original photo a little bit better. And then I reduced the saturation a little bit. It got a little bit too bright here in the blues and in the reds right here, so I just toned it down a little bit, especially in the blue section, see -100. So those are the original effects. And then the type, I wanted it to be its own layer so it wouldn't be so small and washed out, but I also wanted it to feel like it was still printed and blended in. So what I actually did was print it large like this on its own white piece of paper, and then I just inverted it, right, with the smart filter. It's simple as that. Then lastly, a little selective color adjustment, and then just some top LUTs, the color lookups. You go here, color lookup, and these are just to kind of make it feel a little bit more cohesive. Very subtle, see that very subtle change, but I feel like it just wraps the whole thing together. And this is a simple design and composition, but when you have a lot of different layers, sometimes just throwing a simple little filter or a simple warming, cooling, or some kind of texture really brings the whole thing together and creates this cohesion with all the different elements. So I sent that off to Jared, and he was really fond of the way I treated the image and the look that I was starting to kind of build out for the visual identity of the album. However, the sans serif and the color palette of the two fonts that I chose, he said was a lot too similar to a single artwork they did in the past. I hadn't seen this artwork before, but when he showed it to me, I was like, okay, I could see the confusion there. So anyway, we just pivoted into a few different directions, and prominently one ended up being this serif option that was kind of a more handwritten and distressed look. Now I'll show you, this is the V2 file where we had the different versions that we had to agree on for the final. Here's the base design. This, the light we chase, this font was actually, the base of it was, let's see, yeah, Fautive Light Italic. Really cool serif font that I've been using quite a bit lately, honestly. All I did was distress it a little bit. And the way to do that, there's tons of ways to do this, but quite honestly, the easiest is I have this action that I got from True Grit Texture Supply. And what it does is it roughens up type like this. I'll even show you how it works. So we would come here into our actions, small reduced detail. You just push play and it runs the process. How actions work is it runs the process of doing all the things that you want to do. And then look, creates a version right there. How big the sizes of this will affect how rough or not it works. This one right here with the Neue Haas Grotesque down at the bottom, stacked nice and neatly. Looking at this now, I think those margins are a little too tight. And then the original version, I changed it to be printed all the way so it felt a lot more cohesive. And as you can see, these all look different, even the background and everything. And that's kind of the price you pay for wanting that analog texture, is there's going to be variation in the prints. Everything isn't going to be one-to-one perfect. It's not a digital file anymore. So I'll show you, same thing, right? I did the same. I darkened everything up, camera raw filter to bring it back. And then I also started making the white here a slight cream color, and that became the color of all the highlights later down the rest of the project. So yeah, here's the different versions, and we had those to send over to Jared. Once we had those three options locked in, I sent those over to Jared for the front cover, and we ended up agreeing on this one, and this ended up pretty much being the final, this kind of distressed, more handwritten type, and it kind of made it feel a little bit more natural and organic. And the only thing that ended up changed later is by request from the label, we ended up adding bloom back onto the cover instead of it just saying the light we chase. And same as earlier, that was mainly due to just getting some more brand recognition for the band. I kind of broke this project up into different phases, and we did some back and forth on the front cover, and I wanted to get each area approved so I can kind of slowly and cohesively build out the visual identity of the album. And now that we had the front locked in with this simple type and our hero image of the hometown the band's from, I used those simple styles to inform the design on the back. That was going to be a lot more designed and where I could really get more creative with the layout and the typography. With that being said, I knew I wanted the back to be more designed, for lack of a better word, by using this rectangle shape as a container for all that sweet typography. So let's go into Photoshop and I'll show you how that was made. All right, so here we are in the back cover design. I'll show you pretty simply how this is all set up. Back here, this is a smart object of our actual rectangle. I ended up making it a smart object and its own layer so I could go and edit it individually and not worry about having all these layers in this one file. And we had a lot of different options for the background image, and this was going to be a really important decision, really, because it's such a full bleed kind of big image on the back. We had this other image of the hometown, this one of the band from their actual press package that they sent me. I loved this one, and we ended up using it on the inside stickers. And then this one of this house that I also liked that I ended up using on the inside stickers. However, the strongest option for me for this one was this. I loved the band playing around this tree. I love how on the front cover we had those really bright fall leaves, and then on the back here we have this dead tree of right when fall, all the leaves drop and it starts to get more into winter. I edited a little bit with the smart filters. You can see I made it a lot more desaturated and warm because this does not match the aesthetic of the front at all. And even though it's kind of two different seasons almost, I wanted it to visually feel cohesive. And then here's the final scanned, printed, and edited version to keep up with the consistency of the front. And here is the original scan. Like I said, my printer was struggling. Ugly right here. washed out colors, green, and I didn't have time to get new ink, but whatever, I made it work with the camera raw. Did some corrections here, hue and saturation just a little bit. Right here we desaturate the grass by putting it to -80 and -100, and then just filling in with the mask right there to really give it that gray kind of moody feel. Threw a little warm tint over it, changed this to more reddish color, and then some final kind of LUTs to really brighten it up and wrap it all together. And then we had our rectangle container shape. So I'll show you how this is all kind of broken down, right? The title, The Light We Chase, an album by Bloom, that kind of became the branding of the album. Since Bloom is so short and The Light We Chase is so long, I liked writing an album by to make it flow a lot better. Some small copy here, and for all this small copy, I did that same distressing to the type, but I used Neue Haas Grotesque Light. And instead of doing straight black and straight white, we did a cream color for this, and for this we did a really dark brown version of this actual maroon thing. I think using shadows and highlights of a main base color is a lot more interesting than just using black and white. It makes stuff feel more unique and natural. Here's some small detail. I love some small copy. I even got to slip in some of the cool credits here and my own thing in there, which is nice. We had the label logo here, the little copyright thing that you need, and the barcode. And you can see everything set up on this kind of grid, right? And here's this kind of moon type thing that we ended up changing later. It was more just to fill space at the time. Here was an image of the band. The band sent me these awesome press photos like this, right? From the album rollout and from their last tour and whatnot. And I knew I wanted to use something like that, but I also wanted to make it feel more graphical and unique. So we had the base right there, right? I went into the filter gallery and I did grain like this. Here's the settings, stamp like that to get that look. But keep in mind, this is not a one-to-one thing. Depending on the size of the file, the size of the image, how the pixels, the DPI, the color, all that, how big, how small, and all those different details will change how much detail comes out in this. Made it red to match the background and then added that cream color on top. This was the system I came up with for the side A and side B. I really liked this using this Fautive italic font stroked like this and have it have the type on top of it like that. I would have loved if there was an extra track here to fill in that space, but can't just make shit up when it's an official project, you know? Then the bottom, I came up with this simple container shape for each of the members of the band. And I thought altogether it flowed really nicely. And I like how I was able to create it to be cohesive and all relatively designed to this grid, but also different types of typography, but only using a few limited fonts, right? But we have this hero type right here. We have the outlined right here, small stuff. We have this container shape that kind of breaks up the different sections so you can kind of flow and read it like that. And then that was all just built into the smart object here for the back cover. Once we had a few variations for the back, I applied those same typographic rules like the distressed sans serif and the outline on the serif font to the inside gatefold where all the lyrics and everything went to create this more cohesive system. And then I sent those different versions over to Jared for approval. So yeah, like I said, I wanted to have the inside gatefold be built out into the same styles that we used on the back for that typography. If you never use InDesign, totally understandable. I don't think I ever would have touched it if I wasn't forced to use it in school when I worked at the newspaper. However, for laying out large things of type, it's almost necessary, right? Because see how all these are flowed through this grid? I created this grid that flows all the different songs with the title up top, and then we have side A, side B. This would be a lot harder to do in Illustrator and Photoshop because you would have to create each panel. However, in InDesign, you create a big text box like this, and then you can choose to have it flow. See how it says 6 right here? 6 frames, 8 frames, whatever. You can have it flow whatever way you want and then just fix up the spacing and stuff. So it's a really good tool for laying out large things of body copy. Once I had this like this, you can't quite do the effects and stuff that you would like to do in here that you can in Photoshop. So I save this all out as vector and then I bring it in here over into Photoshop to finalize the gatefold. You can tell the difference already, right? Because for the inside image, I wanted to do that same printing and scanning on this image of the crowd. Similar effects, right? Here's the base printed version. warmed it up, took the blues out of it like that, made it a lot more orange, and then added all these color effects on top of it and darkened it up a little bit so the type would flow nicely over it. But I was really stoked on how this whole inside gatefold turned out, and considering how different the lengths are of each song and the lyrics, it kind of had a nice flow to it, right? Like it had this nice mountain-esque type shape, and we had the Light We Chase album by Bloom down here. And the main reason I brought it into Photoshop was not only to add the background image and perfect it how I wanted, but to add a stroke to this type and give it that same distressing that we did on the back cover, because I really don't know how I would even begin to do that kind of distressed typography type stuff in design. And then here, to switch it up a little bit, we have all the acknowledgments from the album and all the cool credits, but we use the Fautive font to kind of break up some of this stuff and separate it so you know it's not another one of the tracks. I thought everything was feeling pretty good at this point, and so when I sent over those different variations to Jared, we had this blue version, the orange, and also the maroon. We ended up going with this maroon version, and I think it did kind of encompass that more dark and moody and nostalgic feeling a lot better. I did like the bright colors, but I think this was the right choice. So once we had that, another section of our visual identity kind of built out. That maroon color became a strong focus point for the next part, which was the inside stickers. One great change that Jared suggested is on the original back rectangle shape thing. I just had this kind of little sun moon phase type thing to fill some space, and he said that he wanted to use some kind of leaves or trees or nature imagery. So we built out this little stamp, kind of punk stamp effect leaves that kind of flowed and showed the seasons changing, and that actually became kind of a visual motif for the entire album rollout. And I thought it was just an amazing suggestion from the client, and it ended up making the design a lot stronger. The inside stickers were pretty easy to create at this point because we had a strong visual identity from the front, inside, and the back to inform how this would look. This pretty simple at this point because we had everything figured out. And I already had these large versions of these images printed and scanned at this aspect ratio because I was trying all the different versions for the inside gatefold. So I ended up working out perfectly. And Jared originally supplied me with about 10 images or so, and we ended up using a lot of them without them feeling forced or having to sacrifice any like super strong images, you know? Yeah, we laid this out pretty simple. Use the same framing device from the back to kind of make that feel consistent. The Light We Chase, an album by Bloom, that same distressing to the sans serif font right here, and then adding in the simple copyright stuff that we needed. Left aligned, clean type, nice container shape, photos and grids. Not much more you can ask from an inside sticker. I was pretty happy with how these turned out. This isn't, you know, the most experimental and complicated design, but I do like that it isn't the exact traditional way that they usually lay out these inside stickers. I wanted to try something a little different and fun for myself and keep the consistency of the way I styled the type throughout the rest of the project. So I was really stoked on how these turned out, and I'm excited to see how they look when they're pressed. So those final stickers, they all got approved pretty seamlessly at this point because we kind of had everything locked in and agreed on everything. And the final thing was just adding everything into the official print templates. So the final phase for the project was simple, getting these stickers into the templates that we needed. And this ends up being a little bit more work than you would like as the designer, because you got to make sure everything meets these specifications with bleeds, the right size, the right color mode, this and that. And then this is actually how stuff looks when it's laid out, because if you imagine how they create the vinyl, front folds in that way, and then the inside gatefold folds out that way, so it has to be upside down and this and that. And then we have our spine, and I was pretty happy that I was able to content aware extend the edge of this image like this to make the spine cohesive and wrap around like that, rather than just have it be a color like a color block. But yeah, that's the final, and we sent those over to print, and we'll see how they look in whenever the record, I think October, November. Here's a final look at the official album art for the band Bloom. I was super stoked on how all this stuff turned out, and I'm so grateful for the opportunity to work with dope bands on sick real-life design projects like this. And I know this was a slightly different format because we're going back into the decisions after the fact, but I hope you enjoyed some of the process nonetheless. And thank you to all the amazing people who support this channel or support anything I do design-wise or anything on the internet, really. I truly appreciate it. And again, I hope you enjoyed watching this one, and I'll catch you in the next one. Peace.